for in the morning, the valley was still cloaked in a faint mist and an almost absolute silence. But Andreas was already awake. For 40 years, his day had never begun with an alarm clock, but with a quiet urge from within. Today was no exception, except, perhaps, for the touch of nostalgia, mixed in with the feeling. This was the final project. The path leading to the construction site was still damp. From a distance, he could already see them. Were yellow giants, resting peacefully, their immense shapes standing out against the pre-dawn sky. They weren't inanimate objects. To Andreas, they had souls. Especially, Helios, the Caterpillar 365C, he had worked with for the last 5 years. He walked up to it, placing his calloused hand on its cold steel shell. "All right, old friend," he whispered, "we have another small mountain to move today." It was his ritual, a silent conversation no one else knew about. Behind him, the sound of another pickup truck arrived. Nikos, his son, got out, carrying 2 cups of hot coffee. He said nothing, simply handing one to his father. Their eyes met for a moment. In his son's eyes, Andreas saw the eagerness of youth, a fire he once had himself. And Nikos, perhaps, saw in his father the calmness of a mountain, steady and profound. "It's going to be a long day," Nikos said, his voice raspy in the early morning air. "The ground at the dam's core will be hard." Andreas took a sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through his chest. "It's always hard," he replied, his eyes still fixed on the machines, "until we tell it to be soft." As the first rays of sunlight crested the mountain, the symphony began, not with a sudden bang, but with a series of familiar sounds. The click of a cabin door shutting, the flick of a switch, and then, a cough from an engine, followed by a deep, rumbling roar that vibrated through the ground. One by one, the 4 beasts awoke. Andreas was in no hurry. He let Helios warm up, feeling its every rhythm through the control sticks. This was the moment he and the machine became one. He could feel the pressure in every hydraulic line, hear the whisper of the gears meshing together. Then, he gave the signal over the radio. "Let's begin." The massive bucket of Helios lowered slowly, and with almost surgical precision, it took the first bite of earth. A clean, perfect scoop. Beside him, Nikos' machine and the other 2 moved in unison. They didn't need to give each other orders. They moved like a wolf pack on a hunt, each member knowing its exact position and role. One digs, one moves, one levels. A dance of power and perfect harmony. Andreas worked like an artist. He didn't just scoop dirt, he sculpted it. Every pass of the bucket was calculated to create the straightest, most stable wall of earth. As he had taught Nikos, "Never fight the earth, son. Listen to it, find its weaknesses, and use its own weight against it." They worked relentlessly, and the pit grew deeper. But then, a deafening screech echoed through the valley. The bucket of Helios struck something incredibly hard, sending a violent shudder through the entire machine. Andreas felt the shock travel up his spine. "Bedrock," he announced over the radio, his voice calm. A large slab of granite. This was the challenge. The usual layers of soil and rock were just a warm-up. Bedrock was a different kind of monster. It wasn't just hard, it was a solid, continuous mass with no obvious weakness. Nikos, in the machine next to him, tried to use brute force to break it. His bucket scraped against the rock, sending sparks flying and creating an agonizing sound of metal against stone. "Stop, Nikos." Andri's voice cut through the noise, sharp and clear. "You're hurting your machine. Power isn't always the answer." A brief silence fell. Nikos' impatience was palpable, even over the radio. For a young man, being forced to stop before an obstacle is a difficult thing to accept. "Watch," Andreas said, his tone softening. He maneuvered Helios slowly, using the edge of the bucket to scan the surface of the rock. He wasn't trying to break it, he was reading it. Every stone has its fault lines. No matter how small, they tell the story of millions of years of pressure and change. Our job is to find that story and listen. He pointed out a faint, almost invisible crack to Nikos. "Start here. Don't strike down with force. Use the side of the bucket. Pry it gently, like opening a jammed lead, not smashing the jar." Under his father's guidance, Nikos began again. This time, he moved slower, more patiently. He controlled his bucket like a giant finger, pressing and prying at the crack. Andreas did the same from another angle. Together, they weren't fighting the rock, they were working with it. Small pieces began to chip away. The work was slow and meticulous, but it was working. It was an invaluable lesson. Nikos realized that true power wasn't in the horsepower of the engine, but in understanding and experience. He saw his father not just as an operator, but as a master, a man who could hold a dialogue with both steel and stone. After nearly 2 hours, with a deep, Guttural crack. The granite slab finally surrendered. A large fissure ran through it, and the rock broke into smaller, manageable pieces. A collective sigh of relief was heard over the radio from all four operators. They had won. The work resumed its steady rhythm. But now, the atmosphere was different. There was a new level of respect in the way Nikos operated his machine. As the sun began to dip towards the west, Andreas paused the machine for a moment. He looked down into the deep abyss they had created. He pictured a day, not far off, when water would fill this space. That water would turn massive turbines, generate electricity, light up homes, power factories, and nurture life. He wasn't just digging a hole, he was building the future. The sadness about his coming retirement suddenly vanished, replaced by a profound sense of fulfillment. The day's work came to an end. The four giants returned to their resting positions. Andreas and Nikos stood together on the edge of the pit, looking at their work in the warm glow of the sunset. "You did good work today, son," Andreas said, his voice full of pride. "I learned a great lesson, Pa," Nikos replied, his eyes fixed on the site, and not just about breaking rocks. Andreas placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a grip that was both strong and confident. He didn't need to say anything more. His legacy wasn't the projects he had built. His legacy was the young man standing next to him, a new operator, carrying the experience of the old generation, and the passion of the new. The story of the steel giants would not end with him. It was merely turning to a new chapter. And as he looked into Nikos' determined eyes, he knew that this next chapter would be even more brilliant.